So, all right. Lost quite a bit of time already. Anyway, is it about webhooks over there? Hello. Cheers. If it's about webhooks, you can continue. That's fine. So, just to so we get something across. By the way, something I would have wanted to mention earlier today anyway is that I'm not here tomorrow. So, which is a bit unfortunate. In fact, quite unfortunate because I want to talk about something else. But since Marius has produced in the meantime a recording for using MongoDB on Golang, or in Golang, the interaction between those, it's actually quite timely for you guys because you can actually look at that cast instead, and it will introduce you how to link those two ones. It's quite useful and actually fits the pattern quite well because you need to eventually store something in a database or the like, providing a state. I'll post the corresponding message on Blackboard, obviously, so you guys know where to look at, but it will be in our usual Cloud Technologies channel. You'll find the video there, and can start hacking around with this or retracing what's happening. But it actually complements this discussion about webhooks quite well. We are not looking into the state element of it, but rather about focus on the interaction right now. I probably also won't be back for the tutorial session tomorrow night, so probably need to do it some other time or allocate time for that one in the next week's sessions, if necessary anyway. Cool, those are a few things I want to tell before I continue, because usually I forget those things and then you guys don't know what's happening. Yep.
We did get a lot of time, like a really late deadline for the second assignment.
Yeah.
I assume that's because the assignment isn't quite ready to be worked on yet.
That's right.
So, is it at this point ready to be worked on?
The specification is not finally out there, right? So you're talking assignment 2, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Assignment 2.
It's the only thing we're still working on is the specification for the webhooks, the payload, for example. That's something that we are still working out on. But in principle, from the mechanics point of view, it won't change. It's really more like the input-output specs. That's why we're careful putting a final state on it right now. But we'll have it sorted out within this week. I think that's a reasonable expectation. So we can actually publish the final specifications. But in principle, you could start, working and looking at it, because many of you actually have, which is kind of scary. That at least based on the amount of emails that we got or inquiries we got already about it. Yes. So, but I will more explicitly talk about the content in the upcoming session then. And we'll also plot out the principal architectural elements of it and link them to the lectures we had so far. In fact, you wouldn't be able to complete it as of now anyway, because we didn't talk about all the components yet. Webhooks is one of them. But that shouldn't be challenging. You'll find it later. It's actually quite straightforward. Webhook is probably amongst the easier ones. But it's really more about architectural design, such as how to deal with multiple invocations, for example. Not something that will challenge your service for this assignment, but something to think about from a developer perspective. But good point, yes. Yes. Another point just to highlight that if we are planning to make your own Slack channel, and Björn just reminded me that you guys have largely divergent email addresses based on historical reasons or simply based on the fact that you are in a different role. So you can manage, you basically can create teams in Slack, and you get your own unique subdomain here, and then you can constrain the people that are allowed to subscribe either based on invitations using a unique invite address or based on the email addresses they can use. So in this case, we extended it from ntnu.no to stat.ntnu.no and also to hic.no. So any one of you should be able to sign up now if you haven't been able to do that just before, just to highlight that aspect. Cool. All right, further on. So something that we can explore just using Postman, we can actually write do some richer invocations on the services, on particular on Slack here right now. So based on the documentation, which arguably, at least for the baseline case, is not too great, because you basically need to extract it from, where is it? No, not that one. You kind of need to extract it from the commands they actually publish there for using examples, but you arrive at something like that. For example, you can send an example. You can indicate even the channel you want to post it to. So again, this API is Slack specific, but it will be kind of similar in a way to Discord. In fact, the Slack API is relatively worthwhile knowing because it captures all the typical features you find in those instant messaging APIs, and it has been adopted by a lot of different APIs as well. So they consider it Slack compatible or something like that. So in this case, we just push to the API and see what's happening. I just took a random URL for some symbol from the web, and let's see what's happening there. All right, I get it 200, bit of a delay of quite some time, but no, it didn't pick up the URL. It's a bit of a pity, but you can actually change the username, which is quite nice. And let's see if we can post to another channel as well. Recall that the default configuration requires us to send to the notifications channel. Let's see if I come up with a good icon here right now. Is there any absolutely addressable icon? A bit stupid going to those icon sites. Anything really? Let's try that one. That's probably, yeah, that's cute enough. So, oh well, let's take those guys. Copy which address. Just want to see if it actually properly injects the icon, how it looks like. So, those ones. Let's post to general and see what's coming out. So that is responsible 200, so things are good. Payload is empty as such, other than having an OK in there, and it's posting to general, but still it doesn't allow us to use the I may have gotten the URL wrong or something like that. Not sure why it doesn't do that. Anyway, it's not too central anyway. I think it's syntax is slightly different. So yeah, it's kind of hit and miss, and eventually you get somewhere. Oh yeah, it got somewhere, but probably the URL resolution didn't quite work out. Cool. Anyway, so that's how you would start off with it. You basically figure out the service, identify the API, use Postman to get something going, you know, submit some sort of content in the first place and refine it. At least that would be the approach I would take before turning to our favorite friend, that would be Go in our case, right? So looking at the baseline structure for a request, hang on, which is roughly along those lines, we can just, well, let's just mock up a demo for that one. So we have probably some main function somewhere. Don't care about responses much. So now we need to think about, the key thing is really about what you did before, representing a JSON structure. So we have something like, I guess message struct, and then all the different elements. Text is probably one of them. Text would be of type string, and I think we probably get away with defining a subset of it, so not define all elements. We want to have a channel, which is also a string, username string, and perhaps icon. It's also, that was my mistake, icon, which is also string. Cool. So how do we specify the JSON representation? That was JSON. Oh, actually, I'm hacking not with you, I'm hacking with myself. That's not helpful. Thanks for helping me out and telling me. Such an interactive class. Okay, what did I do in the meantime? I actually went to my IDE, left you alone to die, but we shall recover that right now. So hang on, sorry. But there's no magic anyway up to now. So let's see, 18, make that somewhat legible. That's a bit better. So we basically have a, the idea was here basically to replicate the structure of that particular message, right? Similar to what we did before, or what you guys did before for the GitHub API. So we need to have corresponding elements. So in JSON, the text field is called, what was it called? Text channel link names. I spare me that myself that one. Username. Cool. So text. What else do we have? JSON. We just do a subset of the functionality that's actually available to make our life a bit easier, and we omit empty. So meaning some of the fields are optional, so we actually don't need to really specify them. Channel is one of them. It will go to the default configured channel if we don't specify any of them. And we have a username, which is probably username, and omit empty. It will fall back to the default username, which is incoming webhook in the case of Schleck. So JSON. Cool. Icon, and that was the one I got wrong. Icon URL omit empty. Good. Sorry? What did I forget? Yep. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In fact, I got that wrong here, so in all cases. Cool. One person is still alive, that's good. Sweet, so it's roughly that. So let's make that happen. Let's use the HTTP default client. Is probably a reasonable approach. What other elements we need to get? One of them is the URL. Where do we get that from? Too much stuff open here. Incoming webhooks. Still only one configuration, that's good. So no one else. Okay, going back to Go. Right, we need the URL somewhere, so we probably, I don't know, store that here somewhere. That is roughly what we need. Cool. And we use the HTTP default client, and we probably can post directly from here. Yes, what do we need to specify? The URL, the type, and some sort of payload, which we need to think about in a second. So URL, then we need to have a type, which is application/JSON. Yep. So and X. So we still need to work on this one. So let's create a new message. we have a text, which by default it would be in the correct order. Yet another Go example, and then point to the particular channel of interest. Let's use general, and the next one is the username. Go user, and I spare myself the URL right now because it's probably not working anyway. So then we have the message. Jason Marshall message. Marshall message. Hang on. Message could do. What did I forget? Yeah, something may go wrong. So we probably need an error here. Is that correct? Since we don't use it. Well, let's be good people and we intercept the error first. If error goes wrong, what's happening then? Say error, or fatal rather. Let's put an error. Error during marshalling. And the error is here. Let's use the string representation of it. Yep, that's cool. So when everything works out, we just say you read we get away with that one. Message, and yep, that should do something. So we send something, it's a post, cool, we probably get a response to it, and we get some error, second error in fact, have another one up there. If error 2 equals nil, and I guess we print it. So we want to print the value if we get an error. 2 error. I want to do something with res as well, so I also want to be good citizens and check for the status code. What's the desirable status code? You're still alive? 200, right? Cool. Status, okay. Right, then it would be error with status code. So everything here, sweet. So we now basically the full functionality. I need to remove this one. This thing. I don't have tooling here yet. Hang on. I don't have tooling. So. Web application. Yeah, cool. What did I do wrong? Class output directory, it doesn't matter. Main file is invalid. That's reasonable one. What did I do wrong in my main file? thing. Hopefully you get something. Yeah, cool. So that kind of worked. So we have the Go user invocation here. So it's basically the baseline of how you could possibly go about it, but just rebuilding the Go structure there, and I guess posting it to the Slack environment in particular. So another example. I mean, you can go deeper. I'll just show you briefly how the what you can do, but it's becoming very specific to Slack, so I'm not sure if there's much value of doing it. Slack also allows you to have multiple attachments, and they would probably look like this. So you have rich text representations or rich formatting of links, for example, and author name and so on. You can have multiple of those. So it's basically a nested array of attachments that you can introduce into your message as well. So something to explore. There's quite a bit of libraries that have done precisely that, but the whole mechanics I've just shown you, so it's quite straightforward. I think there's probably not worth spending much more time on this. Another feature that again uses webhooks, but it's not so really transparent. It's more a configuration issue as well, which you can find for, I think, Discord similarly, is the integration with GitHub as highlighted earlier. I think that's worthwhile briefly showing how that could work in practice for you. So you basically again look for another app for Slack in this particular case, and then we basically have all the characteristics that we just talked about in terms of authentication. That is the OAuth authentication, which we'll do. So first of all, I have my dummy account here, in which I will create a repository briefly.
You actually have a smiley face.
Yes. Is that rare one? Yeah, true. Okay. Testing, right. Test repo, no magic here. Nothing in there. Sweet, so I call that testing, and I just hope GitHub integration. Cool. We post to some channel. Let's use notifications again. Now we need to add the integration, and it basically is an app that asks you to authenticate to your server. I have previously added the authentication to make my life easier, and it basically just allows you to select the repo, possible branches you're interested in, and then the events. And I must admit that this integration is actually quite extensive. So we have commits, we have issues, opened or closed, reviews, new comments, and so on. So it's quite exhaustive in terms of what you can do. GitHub have some icon attached to it, and I think that's all we need right now. So if we just do base integration, then we should be able to see something if I do a simple commit here or change some. I'll probably open an issue. Assign someone, best practice, in this case himself, and just submit it. And if everything works well, and it does seem to, then you basically get this. And here's an example of a, that's a richer representation. Here we're using actually attachments to have that one, because you could have multiple entries, multiple attachments to them that point to different locations. This one will resolve to the actual issue, but you could have, you know, for example, commits and so on. So it could be more than one events that you're actually notifying about. And this actually can be quite helpful in reducing your the interactions, so the load on the network basically, because we're pretty much sending everything in one single message as opposed to multiple ones. But that's a possible other way of integrating. So this one uses the OAuth integration in the background. But again, it obviously depends on the kind of platform you're using for that purpose. Cool. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to kind of talk about as part of this session. So we talked about this one, decoupling storing execution is quite important for you guys. And yeah, I guess so that's pretty much everything I want to talk about in terms of webhooks for now. I think that's all you need to know for your assignment anyway. The only thing you need to think about is to get some sort of webhook, get a payload specification. You need to store that URL, obviously, the webhook if you want, and then invoke it for given events. So you're kind of on the kind of opposite spectrum of the end to some extent, that you actually need to receive a given webhook and then invoke it depending on what happens in your code. We talk about this a little more later, but there's the time package has a timer functionality that allows you to manage code invocation on the server side based on timeouts. So you can basically specify that you only want to be invoking a particular method once a day or stuff like that. So it's a good way of dealing with timing in Go itself. So it's built into the functionality. So it's not you don't need to run through a loop and constantly count the time or figure out how the expiry of a particular deadline or time period. But in fact, Go does a lot for that for you. But we talk about this more when we give out the final assignment specification. Cool. Questions? Worries? No? Cool. Something I want to also bring up next week, and again I was reminded thankfully by one of the participants, is we probably need to have an evaluation group meeting next week. So it's a good opportunity to get some feedback in terms of what works, what doesn't in terms of the course. So I posted the names of the course evaluation group, right? That's the proper term, is it? Yes. So feel free to contact those guys and share anything you want. Yeah, you can, well, not anything, but anything course related that you may not want to, raise in class or whatever else, or privately. That is something you can delegate to those guys. We'll set up a meeting, I think, next week sometime. This week is pretty packed on my schedule, unfortunately. That's why it's a bit inconvenient there. But next week is some time to catch that up. Cool. Questions? Worries? No? Nothing more? You guys are awfully quiet. Am I talking too fast or too slow? Or?
I'm tired.
Yep.
Slack stuff is webhooks from a user's perspective, right?
Again, sorry?
You showed us webhooks with Slack.
Yep.
That's from the user perspective.
That's right.
I think for me to understand how to implement it, do you think it's necessary for me to register a Slack thing
No, again, it just shows you the user side of how to invoke a webhook, which we will use anyway. But I think it's generally good exercise because that will be the more common use case you will be dealing with anyway. So if you use your application and you are tapping into other services, so if I bring back, for example, there was this slide on this one here. If you're interacting with other services and you want to invoke their APIs, and there's a wide range of examples, like GitHub being Trello and so on, then you're most likely just invoking webhooks anyway. So you need to know their specification. You need to know how to specify the event you want to be notified about, and then how to actually link to them. But for the assignment, technically, it still will help you. The only thing you need to do in the assignment, technically, is to store the URLs we're giving you, and have some sort of structure by which we can register what events we are interested in, right? So that will be the trading kind of thresholds or whatever else, or changing in trading thresholds or notification every day or whatever else. And that's pretty much it. Meaning your service just needs to run autonomous and notify us whenever something new happens. But I think doing it on your own, one iteration, is definitely helpful already to get a feel how you interact with them. But it's nothing you haven't done yet technically. Yep. Yep.
The client side as well, that listens to.
That's a very good point. The problem there is that you probably need to emulate network, right, to some extent, which is usually kind of nasty, right? So a possible way, we can probably talk about this as part of the one of the next lectures, is how to mock network services. So how can you simulate the invocation of a network service without actually going via the network? Because there's too much that can go wrong technically, right? So we had the rate limit as one of the constraints for GitHub, for example, and it may just be as simple as network connectivity. We have seen that here for 15 minutes in the beginning of that session. How can you avoid those things and separate those concerns? we'll talk about this, but the idea is basically that you mock the service by taking a given request and returning a standard response. For example, you're returning a 200 and an OK in your body, similar to what, in the positive case, what would happen with Slack, for example. You simply get a status 200 and OK in the body, and that's what you would return to your service, and you need to see if your system, your test can actually deal with that properly. So you're assuming that the server or corresponding client side works properly. Yeah. So that would be the idea. So you kind of mock either one of them. Yeah. Where you basically just inject known strings. Other thoughts? Cool. Sweet. Right. Again, tomorrow I'm not here. I'll post the link on Blackboard later, so you guys will all have access to it. And please have a look at this. It's about MongoDB, so it's really worthwhile, you know, acquainting yourself with respect to the assignment anyway. And then next week we can follow up and see what open questions there are, because obviously the stream is not super interactive at that stage, but it's probably worthwhile to think about where possible problems are, if you could not follow the tutorial or the like. Yeah. Note it's fairly long. I think it's 1 hour 50 minutes around there. So you probably need to do it in multiple stages. So allocate some time for looking into it. Doesn't need to be tomorrow, obviously, but you know, throughout the week is probably very helpful. Cool. Thank you.